There is a place in the northern Ural Mountains where the wind does not howl so much as whisper, where the snow does not fall in soft drifts, but arrives in hard horizontal sheets that erase the world around you, till nothing remains but the cold and the dark and the sound of your own breathing. The locals, the Mansi people, have a name for one particular peak in this region, Kholat Syakhl. In their language, this translates, with a quiet and terrible simplicity, to Dead Mountain. It is the kind of name that should give you pause. It carries history in its syllables, speaking of something older than memory, something the land itself seems to know and keep. And in February of 1959, 9 young Soviet hikers learned why. Welcome to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. I am glad you are here, and I ask you to stay close, because what we are about to explore together is not merely a mystery. It is a tragedy. It is a story about youth and ambition, and the brutal indifference of nature. It is about the 9 bright, laughing lives that went into those mountains and did not come back, and about the silence they left behind. A silence that, more than 60 years later, has still not been fully explained. Let us begin with the people. Because before they were a mystery, they were a group of friends. Igor Dyatlov was 23, a 5th-year student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk. He was studying radio engineering, and he was, by every account, a born leader. Methodical, calm, deeply experienced in winter hiking. He had already designed a specialized folding stove for tent camping, a practical invention that tells you something about his mind. He was the kind of person who solved problems before they became problems. His friends trusted him completely. Around him had gathered 8 others, most of them fellow students or graduates of the same institute. There was Zinaida Kolmogrova, 22, spirited and well-loved, who had been on numerous expeditions before, who kept a warm, humorous diary. There was Rustam Slobodan, 23, an engineer who played the mandolin. There was Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both 21 and 23, respectively. Friends who shared a kind of easy camaraderie that comes through even in the few photographs we have of them. There was Alexander Zolotarev, the eldest of the group at 37, a war veteran and experienced hiker, who had only recently joined the Institute's hiking club and was going on his first expedition with this particular group. There was Lyudmila Dubanina, 20, passionate and stubborn and brave. There was Nikolai Thibaut Brignolis, 23, whose French surname came from a grandfather who had emigrated to Russia. And there was Alexander Kolovatov, 24, quiet and thoughtful. 9 people. 9 lives full of plans and studies and music and friendships and futures that extended in their own minds in every direction. Their goal was ambitious. They intended to ski northward through the Ural Mountains and reach the summit of Otorten Mountain, peak roughly 10 days of hard travel away. The route was rated Category 3, the highest difficulty level for Soviet hiking expeditions. It was a serious undertaking, but these were serious, experienced hikers. The group had done comparable trips before. They had the equipment, the knowledge, and the collective will to see it through. They departed from Sverdlovsk by train on January 23, 1959. There are photographs from this time that still exist. Images of the group on the train, laughing, crowded together, their faces lit with the particular brightness of people on the edge of an adventure. These photographs are difficult to look at now, knowing what we know, but they are important. They remind us that this is a human story first. These were not archetypes in a mystery. They were real. The first several days of the journey involved delays and diversions. A truck ride. A stay in a small village called Vitsai, the last outpost of anything resembling civilization. Here they hired a local guide and set out on January 28th into the wilderness. One member of the group, Yuri Yudin, became ill with joint pain and had to turn back from Vitsai. He would spend the rest of his long life. He died in 2013, haunted by the fact that illness had saved him. He was the last person to see his friends alive. From January 28th onward, we have their own words to guide us, because several members of the group kept diaries, and they took photographs along the way. These records are invaluable and heartbreaking. The entries described the physical difficulty of the terrain, the beauty of the snow-covered forest, the warmth of the campfire at night. They described jokes shared over dinner, the way Slobodan played his mandolin while the others sang. There is a cheerful, slightly irreverent group newspaper they created as a running joke. It's called the Evening O Torten, full of mock-serious articles about their expedition. The tone is light, teasing, alive. By January 31st, they'd traveled deep into the mountains and were camping at the edge of the highland plateau near the Ospia River. They were behind schedule by a day, slowed by weather and terrain, but spirits remained high. They built a storage cache, what hikers call a labaz, at this location, stashing excess food and equipment they could retrieve on their return journey. This was sound, experienced thinking. On February 1st, they began to climb up toward the pass between Kholat Syakhl and a neighboring peak. The weather was deteriorating. The wind was picking up. At some point during the ascent, in conditions of reduced visibility, they drifted slightly westward off their intended route, moving up the slope of Kholat Syakhl itself, rather than continuing through the valley. When they realized the error, it was late in the afternoon, and rather than descend back into the tree line, should have taken hours in the failing light, Dyatlov made the decision to set up camp on the slope itself, in the open, exposed to the wind. This was the decision. It was not reckless. Experienced hikers sometimes camp on exposed slopes. The plan was to get an early start, descend to the tree line, and continue toward a Torten. It was a calculated choice, not a foolish one. They pitched their tent, anchored it, ate their evening meal, settled in for the night. What happened next in the dark hours of that night has been debated and theorized for more than 6 decades. We know what the evidence showed. We know what the rescuers found. What we reconstruct is the shape of the terror in between. The search party came looking for them in late February. No telegram arrived by February 12th. As days passed, alarm grew. Search teams were organized, student volunteers, local Mansi trackers, and military personnel. On February 26, 1959, they found the tent. It was still on the slope, half buried under snow, but visible. It had collapsed inward partially under the weight of accumulated snowfall. It had been cut open. Not unzipped from outside, cut from within. Multiple slashes in the fabric, made from inside the tent by people cutting their way out in apparent haste. The tent's interior told a story of sudden, urgent departure. Their belongings were still inside. Their food, their shoes, most of their warm outer clothing. Several had left without boots, some without coats. In temperatures estimated at minus 25 to 40 degrees Celsius, they had left everything and run. The rescuers followed the tracks leading down the slope from the tent. 9 sets of footprints, visible in the compacted snow, heading northeast toward the tree line about 1.5 miles below. Some tracks showed people walking normally. Some showed what appeared to be a sliding gait, perhaps from cold, injury, or fear. In the tree line, at the edge of a large Siberian cedar tree, they found the first 2 hikers. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, shoeless, were not wearing what they had been sleeping in. Between them, the remnants of a small fire. They had been trying to stay warm. The cedar tree's lower branches had been broken. Some at considerable height, suggesting one or both had climbed the tree, perhaps trying to see the tent above or looking for something. Their hands showed injuries consistent with trying to climb in frozen conditions. Further up the slope, partway between the cedar tree and the tent, rescuers found 3 more of the hikers. Igor Dyatlov himself, lying on his back, his face turned toward the tent. Zeneta Kolmogrova, lying face down, her hands showing injuries suggesting she had been crawling through the snow. And Rustem Slobodan, found wearing one felt boot, with a small fracture in his skull. The fracture was not immediately fatal, but in the conditions of that night, it would have been devastating. These 5 were found in February. The remaining 4 took longer to locate. They were found in early May, after the spring thaw had begun to reveal what the snow had been hiding all winter. They were found in a ravine, a natural gully in the slope below the cedar tree, buried under several meters of snow. And their condition and their injuries were far more severe than anything found on the first 5. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles had a major skull fracture. Ludmila Dubinina and Alexander Zolotarev had multiple broken ribs, trauma compared to a car crash. Dubinina was also found missing her tongue and eyes, a detail that has generated enormous speculation over the years. Forensic experts attribute this to natural postmortem decomposition and scavenging, accelerated by spring thaw. These four were also better dressed than the others, suggesting they took clothing from Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. This suggests they were alive after the others at the Cedar had died, still trying to survive. The official Soviet investigation concluded they died from a compelling natural force, something that frightened them so profoundly they fled a warm tent into freezing darkness. The investigation closed in May 1959, attributing the cause of death to an unknown compelling force. This vagueness created a vacuum. Vacuums in human imagination filled themselves. Over the following decades, theories multiplied. Some pointed to secret Soviet military testing in the area, the presence of orange spheres reportedly seen in the sky that night by other groups of hikers in the region. Some theorized about Yeti encounters, infrasound causing mass panic, secret weapons, or something done to the hikers by persons unknown. The orange spheres were real observations, recorded by search parties and a weather station that February. They were almost certainly military rockets launched from a site not far away. The Soviet military was active in the region, but there's no credible evidence that rockets or military activity caused the deaths of the 9 hikers. What we have learned from modern science is both more satisfying and somehow, in its way, more terrible. It was not a secret weapon or a supernatural encounter that killed Igor Dyatlov and his friends. It was physics. It was snow. In 2020, Russian prosecutors reopened an investigation, concluding the most probable cause was a slab avalanche. Unlike rolling, thundering avalanches, a slab avalanche occurs when a dense, cohesive layer of snow breaks away. It slides as a single heavy mass. They can be triggered hours after wind loading has placed enormous weight on a vulnerable snowpack. They are largely silent. They can move with devastating compressive force. The theory, supported by computer modeling from ETH Zurich, suggests hikers created conditions for a delayed slab release. Hours after they settled into sleep, a slab of snow broke loose above the tent and struck it. The injuries sustained by the 4 found in the ravine, the crushed ribs, the skull fractures, are consistent. With this kind of sudden, massive, compressive impact, while inside the tent, the darkness, the noise, the physical blow, the sudden collapse of the tent around them, these would have been experienced as an overwhelming catastrophe demanding immediate panicked escape. They cut their way out because they could not unzip their way out, because the snow was on top of them, and the weight was collapsing everything, and the dark was absolute, and the wind was screaming, and they did not know what had hit them. They ran because the tent, their safety, had become the source of danger. They ran downhill toward the tree line because that is what your body tells you to do. Get away from the slope, get away from the snow, get to the trees. Why did they not return to the tent for their clothing and boots? Several likely reasons exist. The slab may have buried the tent more completely after they escaped. The darkness and disorientation of a night on a mountain slope. Possibly injured. Certainly terrified. In conditions where frostbite begins in minutes, would have made returning uphill feel impossible or suicidal. And once the cold truly sets in, rational decision-making collapses. The body begins to conserve heat for the core organs. Extremities numb, thought slows. It's a paradoxical warmth sensation that accompanies severe hypothermia. It can cause people to remove their own clothing, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, which may account for some of the found clothing anomalies. The Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted us for over 60 years. The slab avalanche theory doesn't explain everything. The precise cause of internal injuries remains debated. The missing tongue still disquiets people. 9 people know exactly what happened on that slope. What stays with me are the human details. Igor Dyatlov, facing the tent, still trying to solve the problem. Zinaida Kolmogrova, hands raw, crawling through the snow towards a cedar tree. The mandolin Rustam Slobodin would never play again, left behind in the tent. These were real young people at the beginning of everything on an adventure. They were skilled, careful, experienced, and trusted each other. Nature did not care. The Dyatlov Pass remains a place of pilgrimage for those drawn to the mystery. A memorial in Yekaterinburg shows them young, alive, and smiling on their gravestones. Yuri Yudin, the one who turned back sick, visited that memorial every year. He carried the weight of having been spared by nothing more meaningful than an aching joint. The Urals keep their silence. The snow falls the same way it has always fallen. The wind moves through birch trees, saying nothing that we have yet learned to hear. Some stories do not end, they only echo. The mountains have kept their answer. Not out of cruelty, but because they do not speak at all. What happened may never be known. It was lived only once, in darkness, by 9 people who cannot tell it. What remains is not just a mystery, but a silence. One we return to, hoping to hear something different. Thank you for stepping into this story with me. Please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.